Welcome to Changing Higher Ed, a podcast dedicated to helping higher education leaders improve their institutions. With your host, Dr. Drumm McNaughton, CEO of The Change Leader, a consultancy that helps higher ed leaders holistically transform their institutions. Learn more at changinghighered.com. And now, here's your host, Drumm McNaughton.
Thank you, David. Our guest today is Dr. Stephen Katsouros, President and CEO of the Come to Believe Foundation and Network in New York City. Dr. Katsouros is no stranger to higher education. He earned his doctorate from Columbia University Teachers College, and before Come to Believe, served as the founding dean and executive director of Arrupe College at Loyola University Chicago. Arrupe is special. It's a 2-year college that offers a rigorous liberal arts education in the Franciscan tradition to a diverse population, many of whom are the first in their family to pursue higher education. In Paul Tough's study of higher ed, his book, The Most Important Years, How College Can Make or Break You, the author observed Arrupe College and said, "They may be doing a more impressive job of keeping its students enrolled and on track for success than any other institution I've visited." Their numbers speak for themselves. Regular average for 2 years graduation from an associate is 13%, whereas Arrupe's is over 50%. 90% of those students report completing their degree with zero debt. Steve joins us today to talk about how you too can achieve the great numbers he did at Arrupe. Steve, welcome to the program.
Well, thanks very much, Drumm, for inviting me on board.
I'm looking forward to our conversation. This is going to be a little bit out of the ordinary for me because normally we talk about four-year institutions and the things that we do. But what you are doing at Arrupe College, which is part of Loyola Chicago, is amazing. It's a 2-year becoming a feeder for four-year colleges. And it's a great way for driving enrollment, especially with lower income students, DEI, etc. So before we get into that, if you wouldn't mind, share a little bit of your background for our listeners.
Sure. Thanks again, Drumm. I am a Jesuit priest, so I'm a member of the Society of Jesus, a Roman Catholic priest involved in education for my entire career. I've been in higher education for the last several years. I worked at the University of San Francisco as the Associate Dean of the School of Education there. And in 2014, I was invited by the president of Loyola Chicago to consider becoming the founding dean of this new college, Arrupe College. Arrupe is Father Pedro Arrupe. He was a Basque Jesuit who died in the early 1990s and really a great leader of the Jesuits and very committed to people, students on the margins, so very aptly named. And at the time I thought, oh, this is a startup. I'm in my 50s, do I have the energy for this? But it was exactly what I thought we ought to be doing as Jesuits and in Jesuit education. So I was dean at Arrupe for 6 years. My successor is another Jesuit, a great, great leader named Father Tom Knightsky. And I'm now in New York, which is my hometown, and I am the president of the Come to Believe Foundation and Network. Come to Believe is tasked with replicating the Arrupe model, the 2-year college model. And so we work with universities around the country that are interested in our model, and we're interested in scaling it. My goal is 10 of these in 5 years.
Well, those are fabulous things. Before we get into that, I just want to let listeners know you have the creds from higher ed. You've got, not only, associate dean, but you've also got your doctorate from Columbia Teachers College, correct?
That's right. Yes, I did my doctoral work at Columbia. I have a master's also from Harvard. And while at Harvard, I was exposed to the work of Dick Chait, who I know was one of your guests recently, Drumm, and his work with boards of trustees. I am right now on 6, 7 different boards. I've been involved with boards. There's a board that governs Come to Believe, my foundation now. And so it was Dick who really helped me to identify the characteristics of high-performing boards. That was my dissertation topic, and it continues to be part of my research. I've done consulting for close to 300 not-for-profit boards, almost all of them education-based.
Mm-hmm. That's really good. We have a lot in common in that respect. Let's get back to the Come to Believe model. You've got some incredible goals that are associated with the Come to Believe model, and they really resonate with me, and I think they do with listeners as well. Could you go through those for us, please?
Well, the goal of our model is to facilitate access to high quality higher education as the first post-secondary ed experience for students, and to do it in a way so that students feel supported, do it in a way so that students do not incur debt, and do it in a way so that students complete their associate degrees and go on to the next best chapters of their lives, whether it's workforce, or it's been our experience so far that most of our students, after their successes with the associate degree program at Arrupe College or at the school that replicated our model so far at the University of St. Thomas, and that's called the Doherty Family College, those students have experienced much success and they want to go on and get their bachelor's degrees. So again, our focus, first-gen students, Pell eligible, undocumented. Also, we're really interested in students who are B- to C, C- students who with the appropriate supports can flourish in a post-secondary ed environment. To work with those students and to see them graduate in 2.5 years with little to no debt.
And those are fabulous goals to have, and you're realizing them. You have changed the way the graduation rates, your numbers are fabulous.
Yeah, so, when I look at the two-year college landscape around the country, and I admire the work that happens in two-year colleges, but we also see retention and completion rates that are really unsatisfactory for educational leaders. So the national average for students in two-year colleges to complete their associate degree in 2 years' time is 13%.
Ouch.
So our focus at Arrupe, our focus at Doherty Family College, our focus with the Come to Believe model is to get students across the finish line, and it's been working effectively, Drumm. Our average is over 50% are completing in 2 years' time. Also, as I said before, our focus is that students do not incur much, if any, debt during their 2 years with us, and they're getting their general ed requirements completed and some pre-major work so that they can go on, if they choose to do so, for a 4-year degree. So this year, 90% of our students reported that they completed their 2-year work at our colleges with no debt. So that is the story. So again, laser focused on completion, laser focused on no debt, and laser focused on students who often feel like they don't belong in higher ed, or who look at competitive selective universities and just write that off as being for someone else, not for them. And to inculcate a sense of community, of belonging, of contributing and building community, so that students begin to experience success because of an extraordinary professor or an illuminating class or provocative class discussions, or being with classmates who are also intellectually curious, who want to go on and get their bachelor's degrees. And all of a sudden they're saying, gosh, I like accounting, or I like theology, or I do well in psychology, or I'm really good at stats. And I like being in this college environment. So I'm going to go on and get my bachelor's degree.
Mm-hmm. So let's keep some of these goals in mind as we go through and talk about the key elements with the program, because your completion rate, it's 50% in 2 years, and I think you said it was 60 or 70% in 3 years?
That's right.
And so with that, little or no debt, those are fabulous numbers. You're obviously, when I talk change management, you've obviously got to change people's mentalities, but you have to, if you're going to see changes in the output, you've got to change structure and you've got to change process. And that's what you're doing with Arrupe and St. Thomas. So let's go through some of those elements, the key components with it, starting maybe with a sense of belonging.
Sure. So our students go through a rigorous our prospective students, I should say, go through a rigorous application process. It's involved being interviewed by faculty, and it also requires them to participate in a summer orientation. Some of it is off campus. Our model is a commuter model, but this orientation is residential for a few days, and then the rest of the time is spent at the campus. During that time, they meet their faculty. They meet and begin to work with their academic advisors. And I should say that our faculty members serve as the academic advisors. I think about in so many higher ed settings, academic advisors have hundreds and hundreds, 500 plus in some cases, advisees. With our model, our faculty members have 20 to 25 advisees. So lots of focus, lots of personal attention. It's what we Jesuits call cura personalis, care for the whole person. That was really our North Star, our guide in designing Arrupe. So care for the whole person, this very rigorous orientation.
One other piece with that really impressed me when we spoke a couple of days ago was the establishment of relationships between first year and second year students, and that's part of the orientation process.
The orientation leaders are rising sophomores for the incoming freshmen. So immediately there's this near peer experience. And, you're absolutely right, Drumm. So many of our students come to Loyola University Chicago's Arrupe College or the University of St. Thomas's Doherty Family College, and they wonder, do I belong here? This is a school for rich people, for white people, for smart people. And then if they're told, we'll go to the writing center because you need help with your writing. For some students, that's what they're accustomed to, so that's not a concern. But for many of our students, that would be very stigmatizing. And that would confirm for them that they, in fact, do not belong. So my colleagues at Arrupe designed a fellows program where the second-year students served as math and writing fellows for first-year students who needed support in those areas. The second-year students were embedded in those first-year classes, and then they would have office hours where they would meet with the first-year students. Well, that worked because the fellows looked like the first-year students. They were from the same high schools. They commuted together. They ate together. It made it much more accessible and not at all stigmatizing. That was really a brilliant move by our faculty members at Arrupe College that's been very successful in terms of creating a sense of belonging and community. And for students who are experiencing academic challenges, those are addressed in a way that is positive as opposed to being a stigma.
Yeah. One of the big things, and it's an aha moment for these first-year students, is when they finally get that feeling like, I belong here. Up until this point in time, they don't have that sense of belonging. And when they finally can see other people who are being successful, they start to think, wow, maybe I can. And it's that positive reinforcement that they get that makes all the difference in the world. Am I right?
Absolutely, Drumm. And again, it's through community, it's through relationships, it's through faculty members. And it's through a student's burgeoning sense of being academically capable and beginning to see progress and feel like this is absolutely what I should be doing as an 18, 19, 20-year-old. This is appropriate. This makes sense.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And to do that, though, there's also a lot of barriers that have to be overcome. Am I right?
Well, sure. So my colleagues and I, 7, 8 years ago now, tried to identify what can hold students up. What sometimes is the straw that breaks the camel's back. So we tried to address food insecurity by offering breakfast and lunch every day. And besides addressing food insecurity, we also use that as a way of building community, students breaking bread together. And again, these are commuter students. So they had a place in our building to study together, to laugh together, to eat together, to grow together. And that was extremely important. All students received a laptop, so there wasn't, a technology gap. And since the beginning of the pandemic, all students also receive hotspots. So that was another way where, faculty and students were working with the same computers, the same style of computers. To address mental health issues, we hired social workers, and again, they made their services very accessible. I'd say about a third of the student body at Arrupe College would take advantage during the course of the year in the resources that our social workers provided. And so again, this was a way for students who, I was just reading an article last night about students of color not taking advantage of mental health resources. Again, it's for some students evidence that, oh, well, there's something wrong with me. I don't belong in this environment. And so that's not the case at all. And the social workers, we just sort of normalize that everyone needs these resources. And, our faculty and staff really begin to work with students on self-advocacy, on being able to identify, I need help with this, or this is something that's a challenge for me right now. Where can I go at the university or in the college to receive the support that I need right now? One of those is having a financial aid officer working with students. So our model is based on all students receiving maximum Pell Grants and maximum state aid. And navigating that and the FAFSA and verification is something that I could not do. And so I marvel at these students and their families for going through this. And then there's also, during my years at Arrupe, there were a number of undocumented students, and in some states, they qualify for state aid. They don't qualify for Pell Grants. Anyway, the financial aid officer is there to be available. And again, rather than sending the student to a financial aid office where they don't know anyone, where it's kind of embarrassing, where they may not have the right papers, or their parents are uncomfortable with questions being asked, is housed at the college, and they see the financial aid officer every day. So she's not, some mysterious person. As I said, most of our students, over 80%, when they complete the associate degree, go on to a 4-year institution. Either they continue at Loyola or at St. Thomas, and that's the majority now, but some elect to go to other schools, state schools, or other universities, and they need help navigating the transfer process, or even continuing at the host institution. So there's a college transfer counselor who works full-time, at Arrupe and at the Doherty Family College, to work with students, to work with families, to work with financial aid, to figure out what might be best for the student and for that student's transition. And then finally, we have a graduate support coordinator. And so that person really tracks how the students are doing after graduation from Arrupe or from the Doherty Family College. And, are they changing majors? Are they, are they finding the right resources that they need at their campuses? They also track, student success. And so because of their work, I can certainly report to you. So nationally, 13% of those students who start 2-year colleges complete their bachelor's degrees in 6 years' time. And in our schools, over 70% complete their bachelor's degrees in 5 years or less time. So 2 years
Wow.
at the 2-year college and 2 or 3 years in the senior institution.
Wow, that's fabulous. But it has required some serious structural changes to be able to give support to these kind of students. The other thing that you had mentioned to me was the affordability. Many of these students, they can't afford college, and their families require them to work to help support them. The relationship you've built with local employers to make this work is fabulous, and working around student schedules. Tell us a little bit about that, because that was amazing for me.
So I'd say that all of these students cannot afford college. We were working with students, a third of them had EFCs, expected family contributions, of 0. So there was, just college was not happening. And then Loyola University of St. Thomas, these are private institutions with, tuitions that were just beyond the pale for our students. But because they received maximum Pell, maximum state aid, and because of fundraising at Arrupe and at the Doherty Family College, they're able to go for little or nothing. That said, to get to your question, Drumm, there's an opportunity cost for these students. Now, what do I mean by that? I'm sure your listeners understand this. So even if it's free to go to this 2-year college model of ours, for a family, their 18-year-old has just graduated from high school, and with that high school diploma, he or she can get a full-time job. And so families are saying, well, your younger siblings cannot work full-time yet because they're still in high school or elementary school, but you can, so get a job. And there's this kind of tug of war. So with our structure, we work with employers and we identify jobs and internships, paid internships. And, it was our hunch, and research has validated this, that the sweet spot for working, if you're going to school full-time, is no more than 20 to 25 hours a week. But we found that so many of the employers, first of all, in Chicago, in the Twin Cities of Minnesota, Loyola has very strong brand recognition. Everyone knows the University of St. Thomas in Minneapolis and St. Paul. And so to hear about this new program working with underserved students, students of color, a lot of employers say, okay, well, yes, we'll create 2, 3, 5 jobs for students. And also for those employers, there was an attractiveness that there was someone at the college to say, wow, send more students like Drumm. He is really extraordinary. We're promoting
you wouldn't want
him.
me, trust me.
Well, or the flip would be, where is Steve? We haven't seen him in 2 weeks. And then, the employer relations person working at Arrupe or working at Doherty Family College could track Steve down and say, hey, what's going on here? Do you want this job or not? We found that those were great partnerships. And we also found that those employers became donors, financial supporters of these colleges and of the universities hosting these colleges. This was, I'd have to say, I mentioned before about our financial model, there's a fundraising element to this, but certainly at Arrupe College, over 50% of the donors to Arrupe had never given to Loyola University Chicago before. So this was new money, people who were intrigued with this idea, or people in Chicago, let's say, who knew, well, there's a problem here that 2-year colleges are not graduating as many students, or students are not graduating and they're not completing these degrees. And Loyola is trying to take on something big. We talk about a big problem. Not enough students are completing post-secondary credentials, and we have a big solution for it, our model.
And obviously, there are significant startup costs for doing this. But before we get into those, you've talked about a lot of structural changes, but you've talked about them from a 2-year perspective. I think 4-year schools can do this as well, although it's going to cost them more. Am I right?
It's more of an investment, yes. So here we are at the beginning of 2023. And what I hear from students and families right now, and this is certainly true since the beginning of the pandemic, family first, family first, family first. And that means, I've got to support my family. So to say to a family, she's going to be in school for 4 years, you might as well be saying she's going to be in school for 14 years. Whereas a 2-year increment where she's got a job because the college and the employer relations officer at the college has found a paid internship or a job for her, and it's only 2 years, and then she'll have a credential, she'll have that associate degree, is very attractive from a recruitment perspective for this population, first-gen students from low-wealth backgrounds.
And that is critical because folks like this, they cannot afford the degree, like you have said. So to be able to support the family and get the degree at the same time, what you're doing is fabulous.
Well, it's a both and I just admire our students who are balancing so much. They're commuting, they have family obligations, They're taking these classes. They're working. And time after time after time, they show that they have what it takes to be very successful in balancing quite a lot.
Mm-hmm. And we're not talking a, quote, Loyola light. We're talking rigorous academics, are we not?
We are. So at Arrupe, my colleagues and I, we hired 23 faculty members. 20 had terminal degrees. They were clinical track professors. They were determined that this was going to be academically rigorous and very demanding of students. And so, it was a joy for me and a privilege to visit these classes and to see our students wrestling with what their counterparts at Loyola University were also facing in their first and second year classes. The delivery was a little bit different. It's a cohort model. Students either opt for morning or afternoon. Sometimes that's based on commuting schedules, on family obligation schedules, on job schedules. And also, students were in classes that were a little bit longer. So there was a little bit more face time or seat time in class. A lot of community colleges begin with remedial classes that are not credit-bearing. We didn't do that. All of our classes were credit-bearing. And we found, again, with those writing and math fellows, that near-peer support with a very talented and mission-driven faculty who were extremely available. And with the students, sense of drive and determination. 9 times out of 10, this was the right formula for success.
Mm-hmm. Excellent points. So how do you do this? What's the magic formula if you're going to start this program? How would you go about it?
Well, a couple of things. And, Come to Believe my foundation exists to really accompany institutions that are considering this. And so, we help university leaders to do a feasibility study to, first of all, make sure that there is market demand for this, and to help universities see if they have the bandwidth for this, to help universities build consensus around this idea. And we help universities really do their due diligence in terms of learning about the model, so that when you remember my dissertation topic about boards, when university leaders are presenting this to the academic affairs committee of their board, the finance committee of the board, or the full board as a proposal for a new academic unit, they're confident that they do have the bandwidth and the consensus, and they have done their due diligence. Right now, we're working with 4 universities around the country who are involved in our design grant program. They've explored this model. They've done 3 virtual retreats with us, one on how to finance this model on their campuses, one on the curriculum, and the last on the wraparound support services that you and I discussed earlier in this program. They also visited Arrupe College. My colleagues here in New York and in Chicago and I have been very available to these 4 universities. I'm happy to report that they're moving now from exploring the model to planning. They're looking at implementation of this model on their campuses. So my goal of 10 of these in 5 years, well, we're moving in that direction here. It's been exciting to work with these universities and to imagine what the Arrupe or the Daugherty Family College model will look like on their campuses.
That is fabulous information. And, there were some requirements that colleges need to be able to do this. There's a significant cost because you've got to provide seed funding. You've got to hire a dean, admissions officer, the support services. But also what you're doing there at the foundation is you're teaching institutions best practices for enrollment, for advancement, things like that. So you're helping to transform that institution, which in turn can transform students.
You've said it succinctly, Drumm. I mean, we feel like everyone wins. So even if the participants of our design grant program at the end of it say, this is not the right time for our institution to take this on, but they've learned about best practices for first-gen students from low-wealth backgrounds, and they've seen it in action in this past fall with this first cohort of ours at Arrupe College. And so if that benefits part of their population that they've already enrolled or that they will be enrolling, well then, mission accomplished as far as we're concerned, that, more students who may not be well served at some of these institutions, the institutions now have the resources or the experience or the knowledge to meet those students more effectively and their needs.
What you're doing is you're changing structures, and more importantly, you're changing mentalities. And if you ever want change to stick, you have to change both.
Well, what we've seen certainly at Arrupe College, I was there for 6 years, and I'm a graduate of Loyola University as well. So the experience for the students at Arrupe was transformative. The experience of Arrupe for Loyola University Chicago also transformed that university. Our practices, the faculty's practices for retention, influenced the retention practices for the larger university. Our practices in terms of cultural competency really influenced how the university has proceeded in recent years in terms of cultural competency. And then you and I talked about this before, our practices in terms of advancement. So, a very generous supporter of Arrupe, and he and his wife are good friends of mine. They were so taken by the support services, the wraparound supports that the Arrupe students benefited from. They saw how extremely important that was for getting students across the finish line, that they gave a transformative gift of $100 million to Loyola University Chicago for all Pell students enrolled at Loyola, all first-gen students from low-wealth backgrounds at Loyola, to benefit from those same wraparound support services that we started, that we implemented at Arrupe College. So Arrupe, our students, their experiences have benefited enormously Loyola University, the host institution.
What comes to mind is one never stands as tall as they do until they reach down to help someone else.
Well, and I think for us, when we were students as part of the design team for our mission statement at Arrupe College, and we talked a lot about, being with, and again, I'm a Catholic priest and a Jesuit, and so I'm a big fan of Pope Francis, and he talks a lot about accompanying. And so for us, we're accompanying these students during their first post-secondary ed experience. And we have learned so much from watching them, listening to them. What are their goals? What are they curious about? Not this top-down thing, but what are they pursuing? That in many ways shaped our curriculum and how we delivered it. We changed the curriculum based on what we were hearing from students and prospective students. So, it was very empowering for them to be heard, and it was very empowering for the program. Our program became better because of them.
And if you want to be successful, you have to listen to who's taking the program.
It's the joy of the job. I've just learned so much.
It is. I remember, and we're getting to our 3 takeaways here. I knew this was going to go fast. One of the things that I learned in the first accreditation visit that I ever did, the principal of the high school said, kids don't care about how much you know until they know how much you care. And that, I think, wraps in a one statement, describes your program completely.
Absolutely. We get so involved with these students. We're interested in them. They know that. They're known by us. And again, that Jesuit expression from Latin, cura personalis, care for the whole person. So yes, of course we care about them academically, and the goal is for them to get the degree. But we also care about how they're growing, what they're learning, what they're pursuing, what their other interests are. And it's a mutually beneficial relationship.
Yeah, absolutely. Steve, 3 takeaways for your fellow presidents and boards.
I would say, 3 things. First, if you are looking, in terms of an enrollment perspective, if you're looking for a new student population, a population that perhaps you're not enrolling or not enrolling in large numbers right now, consider this model. So there's that. Secondly, if you're looking for a substantive DEI program, then you should consider this model. And finally, if you're looking for new experiences and successful experiences in advancement and attracting new donors and building donor support, consider this model. So those are the three takeaways I would say to our listeners and to presidents and other higher ed leaders and to boards.
Thank you. So what's next for you? What's next for your foundation?
Yeah, so we are working with these 4 institutions now. I'm visiting one of them tomorrow. I'm very excited about that visit, but we're getting ready for the next cohort. So we're opening up applications in the middle of this month. The application season is until the end of March. And, we're looking forward to working with universities that are interested in this population, those 3 takeaways. I want to be very clear. This is not just a Jesuit thing or a Catholic thing. So one of the institutions in our current cohort is non-sectarian. I think for university leaders that are interested in this population and interested in student transformation and institutional transformation, we're interested in working with you and discussing with you participating in the next design grant cohort.
That's great. And if you wouldn't mind giving listeners your contact information so they can reach out to you directly, that would be fabulous.
Sure. So it's a mouthful. My email address is my first initial S and my last name Katsouros @ctbnetwork.org. So here we go. I was 14 before I could spell my last name. It's SKATSOUROS @CTB, so Charlie Tango Bravo, network.org. Katsouros @ctbnetwork.org.
Great. Thank you, sir. Steve, it has been a pleasure having you on the show. I wish you guys all the best, and I look forward to staying in touch.
Drumm, it's been a pleasure having this conversation. Thanks so much for the opportunity to speak with you today.
Thanks for listening today, and a special thank you to today's guest, Dr. Stephen Katsouros, President, CEO of the Come to Believe Foundation and Network in New York City, and for his sharing with us their special sauce for improving retention and graduation rates of low-income and first-gen students. Our next guest is Robin Simon, a 2-time Emmy Award-winning writer, producer, director, and editor, and producer of the documentary Do No Harm, which brought to light the silent epidemic of suicides and burnout among medical students and physicians. Robin will be joining us to talk about her newest project, which talks about study abroad programs.
Changing Higher Ed is a production of The Change Leader, a consultancy committed to transforming higher ed institutions. Find more information about this topic, along with show notes on this episode at changinghighered.com. If you've enjoyed this podcast, please subscribe to the show, and we would also value your honest rating and review. Email any questions, comments, or recommendations for topics or guests to podcast@changinghighered.com. Changing Higher Ed is produced and hosted by Dr. Drumm McNaughton, post-production by David L. White.